Mic check. Hello and welcome to Edukemy's YouTube channel. My name is Harsh Singh and in this video we shall discuss the feature news for today, that is for 23rd February 2022. Today's feature news is on a very important topic, government's capital expenditure push. The reason that the government has increased its capital expenditure from around 1.4% just 4 years back to the level of 2.9% of the GDP, that amounts to around 7.5 lakh crore. What is the reason for this kind of government's capital expenditure push? How is it differentiated from the regular expenditure? And which are the sectors in which government has looked or envisaged this kind of expenditure? What are the advantages and issues? All of it to be discussed in this feature news. Be a part of it. Let's welcome each of you: Ashish, Kriti, Netra, Hima, Ravi, Sam, Amlan, Tiyasha, Vivek. Good evening all of you. Good evening to all the people who are watching offline. Welcome to all of you. Before we begin this discussion, let me quickly let you people also know, people watching online and offline, that in the current affairs video we had one question which I had posted that was on 5 diverse sectors to be benefited most out of rising capital expenditure and give examples and 3 issues to tackle. And I found really good smart replies from quite a few of you, not one, not two, quite a few of you. And I would like to read out a few of them. For example, agriculture, forward and backward linkages in the agriculture sector, manufacturing, defense, drone, semiconductor, real estate, upliftment of post-pandemic. Yes, real estate is one sector where the government is eyeing. It has hit a rock bottom and government is looking at a complete rebound, because real estate provides, construction provides manufacturing, hands. It provides employment. Moving ahead, transportation, sustainable for environment, tourism, trade, all of it. Economy, economic zones, right? So sea economy or the land driven economy, all of them. Then other points, infrastructure, oil and natural gas, Gati Shakti, good, very good examples. Automobiles, EV charging infrastructure, digital economy, CBDC, very good. Renewable energy. And then we also have example of trade and export, special economic zone. All right. Other examples are of rail, Vande Bharat trains, road construction, universities, digital university, green bonds. Dekho dosto, we have all covered these points and some of you have remembered these points. You can't be putting them by overlooking the notes everywhere. You have remembered, and that is why you are placing them here, right? Then you also have put down very good, beautiful issues of issues to handle. Gainful employment, a very important keyword. Employment and gainful employment, both of them are different. One is revenue dependent employment and the other one is gainful, the gain for the years to come. That is the word to use instead of just employment, right? Then trust, for crowding of private investment. Crowding in, a word in itself, of immense weight. Very, very good. And then you people have also mentioned, Vivek, very good points. Issues, policy consistency, all right. Real estate cost, high real cost of borrowing, land acquisition, all right, good. So when you people say that it's tough, it's not tough. All you got to do is practice a little. Kahin na kahin, so you will have to give emphasis, on what you're doing. So if you're giving emphasis, you can see the results right here. If you're dedicating some time for this, if you prepare notes on this only, this is going to be successful to you. So when we study any topic, if we understand the technicality of it or in-depth understanding of it, this leads to a sphere where we don't have to mug up things. We only have to remember some words associated, some keywords associated. We have not heard it previously, no problem. We will know it now, and this is something that will make us stand apart from all the other answers that the examiner receives. And this is the reason that we understand some articles in depth. But largely, when you look at the questions, they will be quite simple. UPSC questions will be simple by nature, and they will want you to explain, analyze, or study that particular issue. And this is why we present the topic in detail in feature news. Today's news is on government capital expenditure push. So whenever there are questions, please put them so that we are able to look out for the answers or get back to you on the answers. That will be very, very good. And you can yourself note the changes. In fact, we are also looking at doing something for the people who are actually proactively writing answers. All right, Kanupriya, good evening to you. Let's begin this. So in recent times, there has been a sustained push on capital expenditure by the government to recover from the pandemic. It is not just pandemic recovery. there has been a planned way of instilling more capital expenditure in the economy by the government. So you look at this year by year growth, year on year growth of capital expenditure increased from 1.6% in 2019-20 to 2.9% right now. 2.5% was the last year, 5.5 lakh crore, and now it has become 7.5 lakh crore and 2.9% of the GDP. That means that this is the way in which we see the rise in capital expenditure. See, the great rise in capital expenditure. This is a very strategic move by the government. If the capital expenditure rises, of course, the revenue expenditure has to go down because we are generating only specific amount of money for the budget. So this time the proposed budget says 40 lakh crore, out of which around 24 lakh crore is what we will receive in revenues. The rest of it will be borrowed from the market, and this 40 lakh crore, around a segment of it, 7.5 lakh crore will be utilized for capital expenditure, rest of it revenue expenditure. This might seem to be a smaller proportion of the budget, but then it is a substantial jump when we see the way in which government is operating its policies, right? So from 2.5% to 2.9% of the GDP, completely 2 lakh crore. What is the reason for this kind of investment? To understand this, let me show some background of this very quickly. See, as I mentioned, the government wants increase in capital expenditure. It is spending at specific four places. There are many other places, but four specific places. Highways, 25,000 kilometers. Railways, you saw the Kavach, right? An expansion of railways. I spoke about the logistics issues in railway, in Kavach itself. Telecom sector, 5G sales, right? And then, garnering a lot of revenues from the same and increasing the outreach, digital outreach amongst people. And then defense procurement. These are the four major sectors where the secretaries of the government of India, IAS officers, are speaking. The government has been spending humongously, specifically for this year. It has also been spending on various other initiatives. For example, river linking, housing, northeast infrastructure, Nal Se Jal, all these programs. There's been another focus on the state governments. 1 lakh crore rupees given to state governments for capital expenditure, and it is a long-term loan which can be repaid without interest. Say 50 years back, you can pay back the loan. These are the kind of projects in which government is participating. There are two kinds largely. One is physical infrastructure, highway, railway, defense procurement, and the second one is digital infrastructure. See, so right when you said Gati Shakti, I actually decipher this, right? This is the kind of capital investment government is looking at. So right now it is 7.5 lakh crore. 35% raise from what was proposed in the budget. The actual expenditure last year was not 5.5 lakh. It increased. So revised estimate were different. If you look from 5.5 to 7.5, the growth is around 35%, and this comes to around 2.9% of GDP. All right. So what it will do is create gainful employment. Remember, I appreciated the word gainful. Gainful means that employment which is going to serve the purpose for a longer period of time. Comparing with MNREGS scheme employment, that will be revenue driven employment, right? Trying to give the labor or the person some finances only for a specific time for that year. On the other hand, if you look at gainful employment, you're giving them the fishing net. You're giving them the adequate and right skills so that they can develop themselves, creating gainful employment. This is the one important thing. And then capital expenditure has a higher multiplier effect. Government itself states that if we are giving revenue, if we are giving you a salary, right, it will not have the multiplier effect. Why? Because we will consume this salary. On the other hand, if we create, give people, for example, if I create a pond will generate economy for fishes. A pond will generate economy for water, potable water. A pond will generate economy for agriculture. A pond will generate an economy against natural disasters, floods, droughts. Look at this. So one capital expenditure, and it provides more avenues for financing or more avenues for the movement of economic cycle. So 1 rupee provides a push of as much as 3 to 4 rupees. In fact, 2 plus rupees additional in the same year and 2 to 3 rupees additional in the subsequent years. So 1 rupee of capital expenditure will create say 3-4 rupees of additional. The data is not exact, but to make you understand, it has a multiplier effect, a beautiful effect of creating finances which are capital in nature, right? Use this example, not only of pond, use the example of tree infrastructure, right? So keeping the whole place green, keeping the place clean, keeping the place in a better environment shape, right? So temperature resistance, right? Also ensuring that water rejuvenation or water level is high at that particular place. So many ways in which you should have these kind of examples with you. That's what I want to point. On the other hand, when you look at revenue expenditure, those do not provide these avenues for development. In fact, if you spend 1 rupee, the multiplier effect is hardly within 1 rupee. So when you want to create a higher multiplier effect with the same amount, 1 rupee can be used to create an effect far more than 1 rupee. This is what capital expenditure does. So when I mentioned very clearly, when our earnings are less, amdani athanni kharcha rupaya, how do we handle this? We will have to take two or three methods. First method is increase in revenue. We will have to ensure that there's an increase in revenue, and revenue increase effective will happen. We will have drop in revenue as far as the revenue from diesel, petrol is concerned, because the prices were dropped, but we will have increased revenue overall. How? Look at the kind of GST collection, right? 1.4 lakh crore per month. So this is humongous and this is great, right? So helping the government raise its revenues directly, right? This is one. The second one is increased borrowings. We will have to increase our borrowings, right? So either we increase our borrowing or we sell our assets. So for the assets, there are quite a few programs. A complete feature news on divestment, disinvestment we had done. This is one of the ways in which we can, get some finances from assets. And the second one is national infrastructure pipeline, national monetization pipeline, right? So, in fact, today only in Business Standard, there was a news. It very clearly mentioned that the government is most likely to miss out on its monetization pipeline targets also. We have covered a complete feature news on national monetization pipeline also. This talks about monetizing those assets which are lying waste, which have brownfield in nature. They have been created already. Railway infrastructure, right? Fields lying waste, defense lands lying waste, government buildings lying waste. They can be utilized for some other or the other purposes. So these monetization pipelines, right? When the government says that they will be creating value worth 1.8 lakh crore, 1.6 lakh crore, I think this was the amount for this particular year, coming year, financial year 2023. Most likely they will miss this target. This plan was initiated the last year and around 85,000 crore was what the value was to be created. They missed this target also. Similarly, we have missed the disinvestment target also big time. If you remember, we had spoken that disinvestment of around 1.5 lakh crores what was to be done in the last year, and they decreased the target to around 80,000 crores. Right? And for this coming year, they have decreased the target to 65,000 crores. Don't have to remember this data. The point I'm making is that disinvestment is a tough game in the current market. So borrowing is the way to go. This is the second aspect. First is increase in revenue. The second one is borrowings. And the third one is private investment. When you people yourself mentioned crowding in the private investment, that is a very good way to capitalize on the private assets. So the word here is blended funding. Remember, the finance minister themselves used this word, and now you will be using this word, right? So blended funding, crowding in the private investment through government initiatives, catalyzed by government initiatives. So when the government funds projects, or the government in fact gives revenue to people, what they want is, they want to expend the money, right? They want to save it or expend the money. And when there is there are expenses. For example, if I get finances, I purchase my shoes, I purchase some clothes for myself, and there are orders placed in the private company, and they say, oh, there are orders being received. Let's look and put in more funds or take loans to create these assets, these orders to be completed. So this is how private tries to fund. They will not initiate themselves. They need some chingari, and this is what the government tries to provide. All right. But then there are various ways in which it can be done. Various ways. Let us look at the various ways it can actually be activated. So when you study the same scheme, SMAM, right? SMAM, agricultural mechanization. When you look at importing capital goods in the country or creating capital goods to make in India, when we look at digital literacy of people, long-term literacy, understanding, awareness, when we look at the sieving industry and creating a capital asset for this. For example, credit linked subsidy for mechanization of the saving industry. When we look at training or teaching students become better, when we look at investing in those kind of industries which are health driven, preventive health driven, right? These are the capital investments I am speaking of. Capital investments which are going to reap harvests in the times to come. So simple example is, are paying the expenses when we catch illness. When we catch illness, out of pocket expenditure is almost 70% of the total expenditure. People are paying by themselves. You know what this is doing? Especially during corona times, it is decreasing the purchasing capacity of people. So the traditional economy in which the money should have actually gotten diverted or got reverted back in the economy through savings, through investment, that went to some other economy, some fragment of economy where it should not have gone into. So people could not invest in the regular cycle, and this is why there was a distorted cycle. Of course, some money is going somewhere and there is profit getting created somewhere, but it is not in the cycle which is leading to gainful employment. It is not leading to that. See, is our economy driven towards the medical industry only? No. It is driven towards generating employment. Is medical industry generating that kind of employment? Not necessarily, not in that magnitude as required. So in the general parlance, all you got to understand is that the out-of-pocket expenditure, it increases. This does not aid anybody. So to preempt, to ensure that there's a preventive medicine, this is why government initiated the program Ayushman Bharat. Two segments of it: infrastructure development, institutional development. So infrastructure, health and wellness centers, and similarly institutional development, the Prime Minister's Jan Arogya Yojana. What is it? Insurance schemes, capital investment for the future. Kali pada tha na insurance. Capital investment, we are spending money for capital investment for the future. All right. So this is for health. Similarly, when we are skilling people, or what there is education that we are providing, what are we doing? When you people are getting imparted education, or we read together, we study together, you are not only civil servants in making, some of you could be entrepreneurs in making. We don't know that right now. Some of you could be those people who are working very well in social sector initiatives, but getting trained right now. So what is it? This is capital investment. This is investment in our minds, right? Intellectual property. So this is again going to not only give you the fish for today, but it will teach you fishing for your whole life. Right? Similarly, when we look at other industries, capital good industries or mechanization, all of them are capital intensive, right? They will need capital for today and they will give harvest for all times to come, right? So this is what has been the requirement, and let us look at some of the prospects and challenges. See, let me tell you a major challenge. You know, when you look at the challenges, some of you said, sir, I don't remember the challenges. Why not? Inflation is such a major challenge. When the government is thrusting money in the economy, it is leading to inflation as well. And there are two kinds of inflation: the supply side inflation and the demand side inflation. So right now, the demand side inflation is not as much as supply side is. Remember, we had spoken that there's 12% inflation in the wholesale price index. The reasons are different. Supply bottlenecks. But on the demand side also, the inflation is not less, 6% plus. Ho gaya na cross. The CPI, it has crossed 6%. So this is a major cause of concern amongst people. What is the reason? The reason is food inflation. One of the reasons is food inflation. Another reason is the movement cost of the logistics. All this is high because our transport infrastructure is low. So that is why road creativity. In the long term, it will lead the inflation to be low. Have you heard in Europe there is a crisis of potatoes or tomatoes? We don't. Similarly, when we look at another crisis, that is of wastage of food, you know, 1/3 of the inflation is directly related to the primary goods, that is agriculture production. Since a huge chunk of the agriculture production, it goes waste, what we can do through capital investment is to have better those facilities where goods are kept. What are those facilities called as? The sheds, containers, the logistics, and the food parks for processing of food, and those the containers where the agricultural food is kept. So those are the places which can actually be utilized to create the capital asset in agriculture industry. This will ensure that the inflation does not happen. Right now, what we are reeling with is far more level of inflation in the economy. The second is employment. What we are actually going through is no employment but growth, right? This is called as the employment-less growth, right? Growth in economy is happening, but employment it is not generating. In the 1970s, when we looked at increase in the GDP of the country, increase in the GDP, it would lead to proportional growth in employment also. So 1% 1970s, 1% growth of GDP would lead to 0.4% growth of employment. But right now, 1% growth of GDP, we do not look at 0.14% growth of employment. This is 0.01% growth in employment, hardly any. So this is a jobless growth, right? What we need is jobs for people, no, remember. So along with automation, along with mechanization, we must look at horizontal expansion of availability of jobs, not only vertical expansion of industries in which specialization, in which automation, mechanization happens. We need wider availability of jobs in services and industry sector. Along with that, fiscal deficit also has to be reduced. Oh my God. So right now, 6.9% of fiscal deficit, and what is proposed is to have 6.4% next year. How to handle this? We do not want fiscal deficit also. We do not want inflation also. We do not want, we want to increase the growth also. We want to ensure that the employment also happens. This is a fix for our country. Investment. This is where the capital investment will play a major role. And one more important thing that will play a role is ensuring that the bottlenecks in these supply demand constraints, they are removed. So inefficiencies are removed. One simple example of this I showed to you was the example of agricultural food producing industry itself, right? If you ensure that there are presence of cold storages, yes, cold storages. If you ensure that there is better logistics, better road facility or food parks, then the agricultural inflation, 1/3 of inflation, consumer price, it will be straight away countered. Look at the spending in digital economy. Digital economy will enable the economy for the future. Right now, it might not seem in the real tangible world where we are spending, but in future times, digital economy will enable a lot of ecosystem for the physical goods as well, right? Example is through digital public goods, we can serve people better. So better availability of services. For example, online certification. For example, digital public goods, digital education, digital health, digital literacy, each of them, digital payments, right? Availability of all services online, insurance services, ticketing, movement, right? What about Meta? Talk about Meta, and there is a huge openness of universe. All presence through digital economy. So presence of digital economy is also very, very significant. Right. What about the private sector then? Private sector will need some boost, some investments, right? So when you see at the kind of funds, right? So real estate, REITs, real estate investment trust funds, and in INVITS, right? Infrastructure investment trusts. All these funds, these are the funds. If you remember, we studied insurance yesterday. All the premiums, they land up in UTI or Oriental Insurance or life insurance. All of these companies, they are empowered to invest in these infrastructure projects also. They're empowered to invest in these projects for the long term, and they will also gain return, and in turn, these investments will drive in the infrastructure in the country. This investment is the PSU investment, government aided investment, which will also spur private sector to initiate more funds. Samajh rahe ho? And when this happens, you will see that private sector investment in infrastructure, housing sector, it will increase. This is gainful employment. See? So the economy has routed itself in a way that it is trying to integrate capital and revenue expenditure. Whenever you are questioned, presents that same model, right? Gym ka barbell, right? Flexible approach and safety net. So safety net should not be in the form of only employment, but in the form of gainful employment for future. Okay. This is why, not a proportional increase in Manrega funds this time. All right. So fiscal deficit, disinvestment in India. As I mentioned, disinvestment has been targeted, but then not happening as per our programs, right? So when this has been a crisis, see, 1991 was a crisis for us, right? 2016-17, when there was a note bandi, what you call as note bandi, that was a crisis for India. Similarly, there were other times of crisis. 2008-9 was a crisis for India and for the whole world as well. Never let a crisis go to waste. This is a very, very old phrase. And India is trying its level best not to ensure inflation goes high, not to ensure that fiscal deficit goes high, to ensure that the growth still happens, to ensure that employment and investment is still a part of India's economy. See, look at the kind of challenge. So when you look at this challenge, you should be able to draw the virtual cycle of economy. So investment will lead to better demand, demand will lead to better production, production will lead to supplies, and supply will later lead to revenue. Revenue will lead to further investments. So this is the virtuous cycle of the economy. The exact opposite of is the vicious cycle, which many countries also go through at special times. So when you people have mentioned the word stagflation, absolutely, stagnation and inflation, this is what we are trying to prevent in our country. All right. So these are some of the ways, right? Some of the ways that you must utilize. All of these points can become positive points. Inflation, a positive point, provided you look at those examples. Agriculture should be avoided. Inflation in real estate sectors like the movement of goods, those things must be taken care of. Growth of the country, so pegged at around 8%, the growth must be also looked at. Employment, value-based and value-based employment creation. Investment must be spurred in the economy. Fiscal deficit must reduce. Prime challenges for the economy, right? So these are important things, right? Another important thing to understand here is the kind of schemes the government has initiated. One, appreciation for PLI schemes. In production linked incentive, government is not giving incentives right in the word go. Government says you create more products, export more of them in an accelerated fashion, and then we will give you some incentives. So this is a major boost, indirect boost. If you remember, there was a game people used to play, and jalebi, some sweet would be tied to us in front of us, right? And then we would be running. So we wouldn't get it all the time, but it would be right in front of us. Similarly, PLI scheme, right? It's right in front of us, government giving us some advantages only if we perform, right? So we have developed ourselves in various ways: agriculture technology, space technology, geographical information systems, so many other ways in which we have developed ourselves. But three areas of concern that must remain in our minds: rural and cottage industries. Many of these rural cottage industries have not even been reported. Their losses have not been reported. Imagine that. We don't even know where the migrant laborers have gone. They have not been traced since the last 2 years. They are to be covered under safety net, poorest of the poor, right? Similarly, health and education services have to be looked at. For example, as I mentioned, the out-of-pocket expenditure, total expenditure by the government around 1.3% of GDP, total expenditure in health sector around 3.6% of GDP. So this is very less. This is less, around 30%, 70% people are paying, and this is reducing the capacity for further investments by the informal sector. Most of the investment in the economy is by household sector, and we are not able to do it because we are not able to participate. So similarly in education, not that education needs more finances, it needs reinvention of the same through online technologies, right? In these times, it is not that the people who participate did not receive revenues. People who are working from their homes also, teaching students, they were receiving their pays. But then we did not have ways in which we could teach them. So digital assets, for example, mobile phones, simple asset. For example, provision of internet, good asset. For example, enabling teachers training program, that is another perspective. Another perspective when we look at education is the availability of regional services, right? So regional languages. This is what government has said, no, 200 plus languages till now, and all through Doordarshan, provided through Doordarshan. Till now, less than 20 languages were being provided, and now full-time education in 200 plus languages from class 1 to 12 will be provided. So government is spending here, spending capital money here, and you gave the example, rightly gave the example of digital universities. Where is it a part of? The budget itself, right? So logistics cost, warehouse cost, they all reduce the primary inflation. So when you look at rural and cottage industry, creation of employment, health and education, and the agriculture, these are the three industries one could look at, right? And defense, remember, defense procurements, capital procurements in defense, 60 to 70%, now 70% to be done in India itself. Similarly, urban planning, not that the urban planners, not that the urban areas do not have revenues, but then they do not have adequate plans. Even if they have adequate plans, then the execution of that is not done. So building those kind of bylaws, plans, floor space area index, those are the kind of initiatives which are a part of the budget this time, right? When we look at the feature news, the feature news also speaks on the same lines, exactly the same lines. So these capital assets are that money that is spent on machinery, equipment, land, building, investment, shares, health facility, education, purchases of new weaponry, all of them which provide some or the other future incentives for the population of the country, right? So these create asset for the future. Revenue expenditure is recurring in nature, right? So while purchase of a vehicle is capital asset, on the other hand, purchasal of the fuel is revenue expenditure. All right, we have seen a year-on-year growth of capital expenditure. Primary reason being this, that we want inflation to be curtailed in the long run. Primary being this, that we want to make available jobs for people in the long run. We have increasingly seen capital expenditure getting higher because we want more investment, manufacturing investment in India, make in India, right? Atmanirbhar India, export for world India. All right. So this is what are very much indicative of the kind of investments. The red line indicates capital expenditure as a part of total expenditure. There are 4 sectors, as I clearly mentioned, which are prime segments which deal with capital expenditure. They are transportation sector. Have a look. The increase in investment in transportation has been from 28% just 2 years back to 42%, right? So this is a very, very remarkable improvement. Along with that, roads and bridges, in the yellow, roads and bridges. Look at this. So Gati Shakti, a big plan. When we plan for investment in infrastructure for 100 lakh crore, national infrastructure pipeline, right? 100 lakh crore. And there are various ways to invest this. National monetization pipeline is one. We monetize some of the projects. And another way to do it is through disinvestment. Another way to do it is through direct capital injection in the market, right? So these are the ways. Okay, moving ahead, communication services, Indian Railway, commercial lines, civil aviation, loans granted to state, a new component here in light blue color, loans granted to state. So you can very well see that the components of capital expenditure, 4 of them, major 4 of them are transportation sector in railways, roads, communication services, digital networks, and aviation, and loans to state governments, and also defense expenditures. All right. So these are the 4, but I have also provided you with the tools through which you can criticize them. How the government is going to collect finances, we don't know. What about the fiscal deficit in the midterm? We don't know. What about the expenses and how to hold on to the loans that we already have? We don't know. So fiscal deficit has to be controlled, and not only that, the total debt of the government has to be controlled, 60%, remember, by the union government. So many shortcomings, yet strategizing out of all of it, right? So this is the update. The expenditure policy of the government during 2021-22 has been characterized by restructuring and reprioritization of the spending of the sector, having long-term impact on output. Wow. Remember this part. Restructuring and prioritization of spendings in sectors having long-term impact on output. Beautiful sentence here, right? It shows the vision of the person who has written it, and it will show the vision of that you people have, that each of you have, Kriti or Hima or Ashish or Amlan, Bhavani, any of you, all of you, or Vivek, any of you, or for that matter, other people here, any of you have, right? You remember this statement, right? And through this statement, you start giving you examples. So strong seasonality in capital expenditure by the government at large, right? Directed towards infrastructure intensive sectors, railway, housing, urban affairs, all of them, right? Okay. Now look at this. The effective capital expenditure for the next year is budgeted at 10.67 lakh crore. How come, bhai? We have said 7.5 crore, na? There will be more grants. There are other ways to invest also, right? So special assistance to states are also given. Including all of that, we will have furthermore expenditure for the capital infrastructure. Remember the word multiplier effect, keywords here, right? What else do we have? We will also crowd in private investment. Good keyword to use. Thank you, Kriti. Multiplier effect of the capital expenditure is high, 2.45, whereas for the state government is around 2, right? So in the short term and the longer term, the impact of multiplier effect is high on capital expenditure. Okay. Example of Gati Shakti master plan. Thank you, Hima. All right. Central Road Infrastructure Fund. There are also projects for border roads. There are also projects for border villages. All of them also help in capital infrastructure creation along with providing defense. Good enough. Great. Robust economic growth path and various tax policy and administration reforms. Okay. So very good effort by the government. There's something called as extra budgetary resources, right? So those resources which are away from the budget. For example, national small savings schemes, loans, right? Government's bonds, which government receives disinvestment proceeds. They are not a regular part of the budget all the time, and they can also be passed on and create the infrastructure for the country. Concerns, very important. Some concerns I have already discussed. The other concerns, see, when we invest such humongous amounts, we don't know if the person sitting next to me, if I have given them the money, they are going to invest it immediately or not. So the hot money must be hot. It must be circulated. If the money is not circulated, there is a time lag. This creates the issue in the progress of the work, right? So undisposed inventory, undisposed capital, this is one issue. That means the time lag to kick in the project, right? This is one issue. Capacity available. We are proposing a plan, but are we able to spend that much? No, we don't have the capacity. We have planned for very much, but we are not able to increase that kind of spending. So this is available capacity. Multiplier effect loses value of people hold idle cash. See, holding the idle cash with themselves. Remember, I told you one example. My grandmother used to place some 10, 15, 5 rupee, 10 rupee note. She would place them at some specific places, and she would have some piggy bank also or other places. But the value of money would not change. It would not provide her interest. It would lay as idle capital. This would not even become a part of economy. This will not also give us the interest. But almost the time when she passed away and the money was later understood, it actually resulted in thousands of rupees in 1990s and 2000s. Thousands of rupees, right? And giving you a simple example of investing 1000 rupees in a company like Wipro in 1980s, it would have yielded thousands of crores, 1000 rupees would have yielded thousands of crores if invested in Wipro in the 80s and 90s. Imagine that. That was the potential of this finances, provided people did not hold in the idle cash. Similar for MRF as well, right? Many other companies. So this is the point. I would not have, my whole generation or family would not have to work ever for this. We would have gone to Netherlands to live. All right. Good, beautiful imaginations. Inflation induced price rise. This is important. When the government is spending so much, it is causing inflation in the market, and fragmented inflation at particular sector and less inflation in the other. And this is where, if government wants to control inflation, it will have to control the spendings. If it controls the spending, there will be lesser private spendings. There will be, if it controls spending, then also, there will be further backtracking of all the economic cycles, right? So inflation induced price rise. And one of the reasons why the whole global economy is backtracing is because of the US Reserve Bank might curtail some of the easy market policy that it has. It will also indicate India to increase its interest rates, and if that happens, then inflation will be controlled, but growth will also be it will be at the cost of growth. Internal rate of return, what is that? Good keyword to use. Please remember this. Internal rate of return. Use karo na isko. Keep using these words. Internal rate of return is the return on the investment. So for example, if I invested 100 rupees and if it gives me 20 rupees per year back to me per year, it will take 5 years for me to get back all the finances, 100 rupees, absolutely correct. So, the rate of return is, in the way that it returns me the finances in 5 years. So if the rate of return is, is such that it is very slow, if the project is caught up in environmental lapses, in budgetary deficits, in some kind of hassles, this leads to the, slow projects. It does not result in giving good returns to people. So these are the issues with capital investments, right? Low internal rate of return in Indian context has traditionally been a result of cost and time overruns. And if there is time overrun, then there's a cost overrun, because cost of the raw materials will of course rise in times, right? There are regulatory uncertainties. Yes, you people mentioned that. Taxation uncertainties, right? Amlan had mentioned a good example of it. What is also equally important is the long-term quality of capital creation, right? So quality is very important aspect of it. Not only quality, but there's an important keyword associated with the creation of capital. One is the output and the other one is outcome. Did it actually result in the right outcome of capital creation? I give the example of toilets every time. Creation of toilets is fine, but is the toilet having water? Are there people available there who can use the toilet, or has it been created in the middle of a desert and there's nobody here, deserted area? So the outcome of toilet creation is very important. Similarly, quality of the creation is very important, right? So some states have raised the concern. What is the concern? States say, you people have given us 1 lakh crore rupees for long-term capital creation, but you say return it in 50 years only. Even if we want to return it beforehand, the center has a problem. So they have Tamil Nadu has raised a concern like this, right? Why not allow us to return within the allotted time? It is good for everybody, right? So largely capital expenditure, right, which is initiated by the central government and then state governments, and also helped by the private sector investments, is about 5-6% of GDP, and we must increase it even further. We see great value in a developing country like India to increase the capital resources here. All right, I think we have fairly done justice to this topic. Let us understand what we studied today. So in this feature news on capital expenditure push by the government, we understood the progress of capital investment in the country, how it has progressed from 1.6% to 2.9% of the GDP. We understood the various examples of capital expenditure, right? Examples of capital expenditure, example of health, education, mechanization, right? Giving skills, all of them are examples of capital expenditure. We also understood what are the issues in capital expenditure. For example, these issues of lag, right? Issue of non-utilization of funds, the long-term delays in projects, right? Non-availability of funds even despite planning. Not only that, there are various other issues. For example, fiscal deficit, the long-term debt of the country, inflation rates. We are creating growth but no employment. Other issues related to it. Not only that, we also understood the examples, the 4 ways in which government is trying to build in capital assets, especially in the infrastructure segment, right? We also understood some examples, 3 specific examples of the rural countryside, of agriculture, and of education and health. Those 3 services become very important for creating capital for the future. We also understood quite a few examples through this. So the question is, explain the reasons for rising capital expenditure by government in recent times. The reason for rising capital expenditure. So mention the macroeconomic perspective. Also mention perspective for the need of the hour, right? So what can be done? What can be the possible impacts of this trend? Impact of this trend. Mention the good points, the impact of this trend, but also to mention the cautionary note that long-term debt, long-term fiscal deficit, right? All this must be under control. Inflation must be under control, right? The quality of assets, the time lag in creation, that must not be there. The not only output but outcome must also be seen. See, such powerful phrases to use. So this is how we covered this feature news in totality. Let me see if you people have put down some questions here. All right, DLI scheme, absolutely yes. So Ravi says DPAM. Yes, DPAM is the one which is, hi Anu, good evening. DPAM is the one which is primarily responsible. Department of Promotion of, what is it? Please somebody tell me. DPAM is the particular department in Ministry of Commerce which is responsible for the selling of assets, government assets, monetization and disinvestment failed miserably. Yes, achieved only 5%, less than 10% you would say, because later towards the end they also sold a fertilizer industry, no? Vivek, sir, is there any disadvantage of disinvestment in the long run? See, these were government assets. I would like to give you an ethical issue here about disinvestment. These assets were created out of the funds which were funded by our parents, you and I, anybody who's paying taxes. And if we are disinvesting it further, again government owned these resources and it also utilized these resources because these were public, these were our own. And now government is selling it so that it can become privatized. After it gets privatized, it will provide services at a very competitive rates, market rates. It will also try to look at generation of profits for itself, right? But these were the assets which were created from our finances and socially we were a part of it. So ethical issue around it is the fact that earlier it was a part of us and it has been sold to divert the funds of the government at some spaces, but largely the assets which were owned by the people in general, they were now they are divided of people ownership. All right, so this is one thing. And another thing is that, see, most of the governments are running without holding PSUs, public sector units. Indian government also has said that we will stop holding these public sector units unless they are critical, and we will also hold only a strategic segment in it, right? We will also diversify and make them private oriented. Defense industries being privatized, space industry being privatized, nuclear industries being privatized, all these are strategic sector, no? Railways as well, transportation, electronics, movement, all of them. So the long-term disadvantages, see, is the time. If we didn't disinvest at the right time, this is a very good time in fact, because government needs finances for regrowth of these important capital intensive sectors. But if you are not able to garner funds, this is the issue, right? So best time for disinvestment must be chosen. It is actually a good time right now. Blended funding, Amlan, yes, 20% government, 80% private, good enough. DLI scheme is a good example. Hima says, when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and the other represents opportunity. Yeah. See, so crisis, she says, in Chinese, when it is written, it has two characters. One represents danger and the other one is an opportunity. So when people were a little disturbed just before the pre-examination because of Omicron variant, I mentioned very clearly that this is not only a time of crisis, this is a time of opportunity for you, because many people would get distracted thinking, oh, exam to baad mein ho jayega, it will happen later. Exam might get postponed, looks like I won't be able to focus, whatever it be the cause. But on the other hand, there were people who were struggling hard, they were studying really well during those times, they didn't lose focus, it was a time of opportunity for them. So two sides of the same coin. Kriti says, all right, Hima, all right. Recently, government provided first installment of PM Awas Yojana, but out of money for second installment. See, so even MNREGS funds delay in payments. All right. There are many ways in which, one example I missed while I was talking about MSMEs. Many of the micro, small and medium industries, these industries have provided services and products to the private entities, and on the other hand, private entities have not paid them back on time, right? Even government has taken services and products from them and not paying them back on time. It leads to complete fallible structure for MSMEs, right? They will not be able to cycle the next round of payments and next round of production for this. And this is the reason that we initiated some programs, right? If you remember, we had some programs for MSMEs and a separate app built for MSMEs for payment. This was one of the initiatives. The other initiative was some specific ways of payment of MSMEs. One was pre-packaged insolvency resolution plan for MSMEs, and the other one was getting loans from NBFCs. If you remember all this, Very, very important schemes, each of them. Do you remember the name of the app or the name of the scheme where they could get funded by NBFCs? If you know, you please mention it right here, right? Then Ravi says Department of Investment in Public Asset Management. All right, thank you. Ministry of Finance. Thank you. Not Commerce, Ministry of Finance. TREADS. TREADS is the TREADS scheme for MSMEs. Yes, Vivek, thank you very much for this. So this is the update here. If you like this conversation and discussion, share some love through likes, comments, and shares. We will meet you tomorrow with another round of current affairs and feature news. Thank you for participating and being here. We will meet tomorrow and discuss further. Questions, please put them down. Thank you for participating.